All right, Danny Jacobs wins a 12-round unanimous decision over, I can't pronounce the guy's first name, but his surname is Sulecki. I believe it's pronounced Sulecki. That's how I remember the HBO commentators pronouncing it anyway. So if I'm butchering his surname, please forgive me, but I'm going to call him Sulecki for the duration of this video. So I was quite impressed by Sulecki in this fight. I thought that he was clearly the better boxer than Danny Jacobs. I felt like he was getting the better of the action at long range. And this is a guy coming up from light middleweight, I believe. He hasn't been a middleweight very long. This might be his first fight at middleweight. I'm not sure. It's the first time I've seen him fight. But I was impressed. Good long range boxer. He was taller than Jacobs by, I think, a couple of inches. Had longer arms. Not a longer reach, I don't believe, but the arm length. HBO are one of the few networks that measure arm length, and they showed that his arm length was marginally longer than Danny Jacobs' arm length. So he used his arm length to good effect. Nice jabs, nice counter punching. Landed his right hand against Jacobs aplenty, clean. Again, good counter shots. I was impressed with Sulecki. Outboxing Danny Jacobs through the first few rounds. Jacobs, after a couple of rounds, realized he had to impose himself on this guy. And he did so fairly effectively. Yeah, he didn't hurt Sulecki in those first 4 rounds, but he did manage to open up on him a couple of times and just use his superior physical strength, his more explosive punching, and his size, I guess. Even though he was the shorter man, he's the naturally bigger man. He looked bigger. You know, his body looked bigger. Even though he was a bit shorter, his body looked bigger. So basically, Danny Jacobs was getting the better of it when it was a brawl, but Sulecki was getting the better of it when it was a boxing match, you know, and it continued throughout most of the fight. Although I think either Jacobs was making adjustments defensively as the fight went on, or Sulecki was getting a bit tired as the fight wore on, probably a bit of both, because Sulecki's long range boxing started to lose a little bit of its effectiveness through the second half of the fight, let's say. But still, I thought it was a very close fight. I thought it was competitive. I think that the knockdown in the 12th round, where Danny Jacobs finally managed to drop Sulecki, and Sulecki wasn't seriously hurt. It was a good knockdown, good clean knockdown. But Sulecki got up and he didn't look on the brink of collapse or anything like that. He still looked like he was completely cognitive and, you know, had all his faculties about him and whatnot. So, yeah, I think it was a close fight for me. I didn't score it round by round, but my impression of the fight watching was that it was a close fight and that the knockdown might have actually been the deciding factor. I think one judge had Danny Jacobs winning by 3 rounds. That, to me, as somebody who didn't score it round by round, okay, seemed like the most reasonable scorecard. You know, again, I didn't score it round by round, but the overall feeling I get is that that's the kind of score you should be getting for this fight. If you got Danny Jacobs winning, him winning marginally, with the knockdown obviously giving him 2 points, a 2-point buffer. So without the knockdown, you know, it would have been closer. So yeah, I thought it was a decent fight overall. Danny Jacobs showed he can be outboxed on the outside, definitely. Sulecki showed that he's, I don't want to say a force to be reckoned with at middleweight yet. I think it's too early to say that. But I think he showed he's competent at world level as a middleweight. So we'll see what happens for him in his career. I've seen a lot of people after this fight saying Danny Jacobs would get schooled by Billy Joe Saunders based on this Sulecki fight. I think people are getting way too carried away with Billy Joe Saunders' win over David Lemieux. I didn't hesitate to pick Billy Joe over David Lemieux. Many people were very unsure about what would happen in the fight, and especially in the States, a lot of people were picking Lemieux. I never picked Lemieux. I never wavered on who I thought was going to win the fight. I was saying all along, this is a Billy Joe fight. He's going to win this fight. Yeah, if he's in shape, he's sharp, He's going to beat David Lemieux. He's just so much better than Lemieux technically. And people have gotten carried away with that. Now, I didn't expect Billy Joe to beat Lemieux as easily as he did, but I still expected him to win. Lemieux has got terrible, terrible footwork. He's off balance frequently. These are things which I've said about Lemieux for years. Danny Jacobs is on a whole other level to David Lemieux. Technically, speed-wise, he's taller than Lemieux. He's a better long-range boxer than Lemieux. It would be far, far more difficult for Billy Joe to beat a Danny Jacobs than it would be to beat a David Lemieux. Trust me on that one. If you think he's going to do to Jacobs what he did to Lemieux, I think you are very, very, very misguided if that's what you think would happen. Very misguided. I'm not saying Billy Joe can't beat Jacobs. All I'm telling you is it ain't going to be easy. Anyone thinking there's going to be a schooling and all this kind of stuff, you're barking up the wrong tree. That's not going to happen. Yeah. The Billy Joe Lemieux fight was a good performance by Billy Joe, but it did flatter Billy Joe quite a bit because Lemieux is so technically poor. Lemieux really is just a big punch. And I said a long time ago that Lemieux to me is like a poor man's Nigel Benn. He's got a similar style, but a poor man's version means he's just not as good as Nigel Benn. His balance is not as good as Ben. His skills are not as good. His heart is not as big. You know, he's just a poor man's version of Nigel Benn. A similar fighter, but just not quite as good. And, you know, Nigel Benn was never the most technically proficient guy, but Nigel Benn at least had a back foot game. Yeah, if you see some of Nigel Benn's fights when he was WBC super middleweight champion, it's before the McClellan fight, there were fights that he won boxing on the back foot, moving around and stuff like that. I've never seen David Lemieux do anything like that. David Lemieux has no footwork. He's a very, very hard punching man who comes forward and swings and frequently throws himself off balance. That's who David Lemieux is. That is not Danny Jacobs, right? Danny Jacobs did look raw in spots against Sulecki. God, I'm proper butchering this guy, this guy's name. He did look raw in spots, but Sulecki is what, 6'1"? Billy Joe is listed, I think, as 5'11" or 5'10". He's nowhere near 5'11". Billy Joe's maybe 5'9". Yeah, you look at Billy Joe when he fought Eubank Jr. Eubank Jr. is 5'11", people. And look how much taller Eubank Jr. was compared to Billy Joe. Like, they're not even close in height. Now, Billy Joe's about 5'9". Sulecki's 6'1". So Billy Joe ain't going to have the height of a Sulecki. And he's a southpaw, so the angles are different. Danny Jacobs is more explosive than anyone Billy Joe's been in the ring with before. He's a big middleweight. He's got physicality. And he's got heart. You've seen Danny Jacobs. You've seen the way he fights. You saw how he was against Golovkin and Sulecki. Danny Jacobs has got a lot of fire in his belly. A lot of fire in his belly. This is not a guy who's going to just sleepwalk his way to a 12-round points loss the way that David Lemieux did, you know, against Billy Joe. Even against Golovkin. Just compare Danny Jacobs' performance against Golovkin to Lemieux's performance against Golovkin. Who tried harder? Who showed more heart? Who showed they had more fire in the belly? Who was less willing to resign themselves to defeat? Danny Jacobs at no point in the fight against Golovkin resigned himself to defeat. In fact, the longer the fight went on, the more fire and ferocity Danny Jacobs had. Whereas with Lemieux, when he fought Golovkin, he lost heart relatively quickly. So again, do not mistake David Lemieux for a Danny Jacobs, people. You think Billy Joe's going to have a similar kind of time with Jacobs as he had with Lemieux? Barking up the wrong tree. Anyway, I felt like it was a closer fight, Jacobs versus Sulecki, than Harold Lederman made it out to be. You know, it wasn't until I think Max Kellerman and Jim Lampley started questioning Harold Lederman's scorecard that Lederman maybe started adjusting it a little bit and making the fight closer. Because he was looking straight senile. I think he gave, Sulecki one of the first 7 rounds or something crazy like that? Hell no. The fight was way closer. Even Roy Jones, I thought, was way off in terms of his perception of the fight. I thought the fight was way closer than both of them guys had it for the majority of the fight. But I can't argue at the end of the day with a Danny Jacobs win, particularly with that knockdown in the 12th, you know. But I do feel like it was a little wide. So, yeah, interesting fight. Pretty entertaining fight. I look forward to seeing Sulecki again. And Danny Jacobs, there are things to improve on there. But then again, he is, what is he, in his early 30s now, mid-30s? There's not that much he can do to change at this stage of his career. But, you know, styles make fights, I think, at the end of the day. And he's looking at guys like Golovkin. He's looking at guys like Canelo. I don't think those guys are going to be as awkward on the outside as Sulecki was. I mean, we've seen Golovkin wasn't as awkward on the outside as Sulecki was. Golovkin's obviously much more dangerous on the inside. But on the outside, you know, not quite as awkward as Sulecki in terms of moving around and stuff like that. Golovkin comes at you, which is what Danny Jacobs wants. Danny Jacobs likes to fight. You know, he likes to swing it out with people. So, people obviously talking about Charlo against Danny Jacobs. Some people saying Charlo will beat Jacobs on that performance. I mean, I think Charlo Jacobs is a good fight. It's definitely a fight I want to see. But don't read too much into the Sulecki fight. Styles make fights, people. So when you see Danny Jacobs having issues with a guy like Sulecki, ask yourself, does Charlo fight like Sulecki? He doesn't. He doesn't fight like that. Charlo is a much more aggressive fighter than Sulecki. So it wouldn't be that kind of fight, I don't think. If Charlo's going to beat Danny Jacobs, cool, you think he's going to beat him. But it's not going to be done in the same way that Sulecki was fighting Danny Jacobs. You know, Charlo don't fight like that. Same with Golovkin and most of the top middleweights. They don't fight the way Sulecki does. They're not 6'1". You know, they don't have longer arms than Jacobs. So it's going to be different. Anyway, let me stop waffling here, people. Let me know how you thought about Jacobs' performance, who you'd like to see him fight next. He did call out Charlo in the post-fight interview, predictably. So hopefully we can see it in the near future. Yeah, let me know how you feel. I'm out.